You know that feeling when you realize everyone around you has been playing a completely different game than you thought? Well, buckle up, because what I discovered 3 days ago changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my in-laws. And honestly, if you're reading this thinking I'm some paranoid guy who can't take a hint, just wait until you hear what these people actually had planned. I'm Kyle, 32, been married to Vanessa for 4 years. Her family never liked me from day one, and they've made that crystal clear in 1,000 little ways. Her dad, Clarence, thinks I'm beneath his precious daughter because I work construction while she's got her marketing degree from some state school she acts like was Harvard. The man literally introduced me to his golf buddies as Vanessa's friend for the first 2 years we were together. When we got engaged, he asked me 3 separate times if I was sure I could afford to take care of his daughter properly. Her mom, Gladys, makes these little comments about how Vanessa could have done better. Usually when she thinks I'm not listening, she'll say things like, "I just worry about Vanessa settling," or "I hope she doesn't regret this choice later," while I'm sitting right there. She always apologizes and claims she didn't mean anything by it, but come on. Her brother Patrick acts like I'm invisible at family gatherings, literally walking past me without acknowledgement. He'll ask Vanessa how she's doing and completely ignore that I'm standing next to her. Even her sister Maria treats me like I'm some kind of charity case they have to tolerate. She once asked Vanessa in front of me if she was happy with her choice and said she just wanted to make sure Vanessa wasn't sacrificing her potential. The thing is, I knew they didn't like me, but I thought it was just typical in-law stuff. My own parents died in a car accident when I was 19, so I didn't have much experience with extended family dynamics. I figured this was normal, that eventually they'd warm up to me if I just kept being respectful and showed them I was good for Vanessa. I was wrong about a lot of things, but here's what none of them know. I've been preparing for this exact moment for 3 years. Not hoping for it, not dreading it, but actually preparing. Because I knew eventually their true feelings would surface in a way I could use. And before anyone starts typing about how I should have just left or stood up for myself, let me explain why that wasn't an option for someone like me. See, what happened 3 years ago was Vanessa left her phone on our kitchen counter while she went to shower. Nothing suspicious about that, right? It was a Tuesday evening in March, I remember, because we'd just gotten back from her cousin's birthday party where her family had spent the entire night making jokes about my job and asking when I was going to get a real career. Vanessa had laughed along with all of it. I was sitting at our kitchen table eating leftover pizza and trying to shake off the feeling that I'd just been the entertainment for their evening. Her WhatsApp notifications kept going off, and the preview showed her mom's name saying something about keeping secrets from me. The exact preview said, "Make sure Kyle doesn't find out about," and then it cut off. I stared at that phone for probably 10 minutes. I could hear the shower running upstairs. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I used her fingerprint while she was still drying off to unlock her phone. I went straight to the WhatsApp notification and opened the family group chat. What I saw made my hands shake so bad I almost dropped the phone. The conversation had been going on for hours, and I was the main topic. Not just that night, but going back weeks. They were discussing me like I was some kind of problem they needed to solve together. What I found was a family group chat called Family Only that had been running for months. Hundreds of messages about how I was ruining Vanessa's life, how they needed to find ways to get rid of me, how I was just using her for money even though she makes barely more than I do. Clarence had written a long message about how I was dead weight, dragging his daughter down, and how they needed to help her see reality. Gladys had sent multiple messages about different men they thought would be better for Vanessa, including photos of guys from church and her coworkers. Patrick had sent screenshots of my social media posts, making fun of things I'd written. Maria had shared stories about successful men she knew who were still single. But the worst part, the part that changed everything, was reading Vanessa's messages agreeing with all of it. She called me lazy and unmotivated. She said I was holding her back from her potential. She complained about how I never wanted to go to expensive restaurants or take fancy vacations like her friends' husbands did. She said she was only staying because she felt sorry for me since I didn't have family and she didn't want to abandon me completely. She wrote that she knew I could never afford to take care of her the way she deserved. One message from her hit me like a punch to the chest. She wrote, "I know Kyle tries, but he's just not the kind of man I thought I'd end up with. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I'd made different choices." Her mom had responded, "It's not too late to make better choices, honey." That night changed me completely, not in some healing, personal growth kind of way that people write about in self-help books. It made me angry in a cold, calculated way that's been burning steady for 3 years. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't cry or have some breakdown in our bathroom. I didn't throw her phone across the room or wake her up demanding explanations. I just started planning. I got better at my job, started my own small contracting business on weekends, built up savings they don't know about in an account at a different bank, made connections they don't know about with people in their social circle who actually respect blue-collar work, started documenting everything they said and did when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Most importantly, I got close to people in their circle they trust more than me. The business part wasn't just about money, though that helped. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I started taking night classes for project management. I got my contractor's license. I networked with people who needed quality work done. Within 6 months, I was making more money than Vanessa, but I never told her about the extra income. I kept living like I was still paycheck to paycheck while building a war chest. I also started paying attention to their friends and connections differently. I realized that Clarence's golf buddy Steven had always been friendly to me, and his wife had hired me to redo their bathroom. They were impressed with my work and started recommending me to others. Through them, I met other people in Vanessa's family's social circle who didn't look down on manual labor. I cultivated these relationships carefully, being helpful and reliable, building a reputation separate from what her family thought of me. But the most important connection I made was with Tom's wife, Irene. Tom has been my best friend since college, or so I thought. We hang out every Tuesday for poker night, go to games together, the whole thing. Irene and I had always been friendly at group gatherings, but I started noticing things about their marriage that reminded me of my own situation. The way Tom would dismiss her opinions in front of people. How he'd make jokes about her job as a dental hygienist like it wasn't a real profession. How he'd flirt with other women right in front of her and then tell her she was being paranoid when she got upset. Which brings me to Tuesday night. Vanessa was at her sister's place for their weekly wine session and left her iPad on our couch. Same family chat was open, except now it had 53 new messages from the past week, all about tomorrow's Sunday lunch at her parents' house. I almost couldn't believe what I was reading. After 3 years of subtle manipulation and passive aggression, they were finally ready to go nuclear. They weren't just planning to humiliate, they were planning to destroy me in front of an audience. And they'd been planning it for weeks. Clarence had bought champagne specifically for what he called finally getting rid of the 32-year-old failure. The message included a photo of 2 bottles of expensive champagne with a caption about celebrating liberation. Gladys had been practicing a speech about how they never liked me and nobody ever would. She'd actually written it out and shared it in the chat, asking for feedback on which parts would hurt the most. Patrick was setting up his phone in different corners of their dining room to record everything from multiple angles. He'd sent photos of his setup and talked about getting the best footage for what he called the Kyle finale. The plan was for Vanessa to announce she'd been sleeping with my best friend Tom for 3 years, that he was twice the man I'd ever be, and then Tom would walk in for some dramatic kiss while Maria threw divorce papers at me. But they'd also planned out my reaction, discussing what they thought I'd do and how to make it worse. They wanted me to break down completely. But wait, it gets worse. They'd invited my coworkers from my main job. They'd invited neighbors from our street. They'd invited people from our gym. Maria was planning to live stream the whole thing on Instagram with captions about watching a pathetic man get destroyed. She'd created fake accounts to share it wider and make sure it went viral. They'd literally made a countdown clock on their group chat marking hours until they'd be free from what they called their dead weight. Reading those messages, I realized this wasn't just about getting me out of Vanessa's life. This was about complete social destruction. They wanted to humiliate me so thoroughly that I'd have to leave town. They wanted to make sure everyone knew I was worthless, that I'd never recover from this publicly. They were planning to destroy my reputation, my friendships, my business connections, everything I'd built over the past 3 years. But what they don't know is that Tom's wife, Irene, has been suspicious about his Tuesday evening poker games for months. What they don't know is that Irene and I have been comparing notes since January, when she noticed Tom getting mysterious texts during their date nights. What they don't know is that those texts weren't from poker buddies asking about the game. Irene first approached me in January at a birthday party for one of our mutual friends. She pulled me aside and asked if Tom had seemed different lately during our poker nights. She said he'd been coming home at weird hours, sometimes not until after midnight for a game that usually ended by 10. He'd been showering immediately when he got home and keeping his phone face down all the time. She asked if I'd noticed him texting more during our games or if he seemed distracted. The thing is, I had noticed. Tom had been checking his phone constantly during poker, smiling at messages and typing responses quickly before putting it back down. When guys asked who he was texting, he'd always say it was work stuff or his mom. But his body language didn't match his words. He was acting like a guy with a secret. Irene and I started meeting for coffee occasionally, just to talk about what we'd both observed. She told me about finding receipts for restaurants they'd never been to together, and charges on their credit card for gifts she'd never received. I told her about Tom's behavior during our Tuesday nights and how he'd started canceling on group activities with everyone except those poker games. What they don't know is that Tom isn't the only one who's been keeping secrets. What they really don't know is what's on the USB drive I've been carrying in my pocket for 2 weeks. The one with photos I took of Vanessa's iPad screen showing their family chat messages from months ago, bank statements, showing the money I've been saving that they think doesn't exist, text screenshots from when I finally started documenting things they said to me directly instead of just behind my back, and a very interesting recording from last month when Vanessa thought I was working late. That recording happened completely by accident, but it changed everything. I'd left my phone in our bedroom charging and forgotten about it when I left for what I told Vanessa was a late job. Really, I was meeting with a potential new client, but I got done early and came home to grab some paperwork. I could hear voices from our living room as I came up the stairs, so I figured Vanessa had friends over. I was about to announce myself when I heard Tom's voice. They were talking about their relationship, about how long they'd been together, about when they were going to tell me. Vanessa was saying she felt guilty about the timing, but that her family's plan for Sunday would make everything easier. Tom was talking about how he'd never really respected me anyway, and how this whole thing was probably for the best. The conversation lasted almost 40 minutes, and my phone was recording the whole time because I'd left a voice memo app running by mistake from earlier that day. Listening to that recording later was worse than reading the family chat. These were two people I trusted most in the world discussing my life like I was some obstacle they needed to remove. They talked about my feelings like they were inconvenient but ultimately irrelevant. They planned out how they'd handle my reaction, with Tom saying he'd be gentle but firm, and Vanessa saying her family would help make sure I understood it was really over. This morning, Vanessa kissed me goodbye and told me to wear my nice shirt for lunch tomorrow. She looked me right in the eyes and smiled while telling me how much her family was looking forward to seeing me. She asked if I was excited for our special Sunday together and said she thought it would be a day I'd never forget. I told her I couldn't wait to see what surprises the day would bring. She laughed and said she thought I'd really enjoy seeing everyone, and that there might be some unexpected guests who'd make the day even more memorable. The level of planning and coordination that went into this is honestly impressive. They've thought of everything except one crucial detail. They planned this whole elaborate public humiliation assuming I'm the same naive guy who's been taking their subtle abuse for 4 years. They think I'm going to walk into that dining room tomorrow expecting a normal family lunch and get blindsided by their coordinated attack. Tonight, I'm supposed to be watching football like every Friday night. Instead, I'm sitting in my truck outside Tom's house waiting for him to leave for his usual Friday night bar session with his work buddies. Because Tom's wife, Irene, is going to be very interested in the contents of my USB drive. And tomorrow, when they're all gathered for their big show, when the cameras are rolling and the champagne is ready, when Vanessa delivers her practiced lines about Tom being twice the man I am, that's when Irene is going to walk into that dining room. See, they invited everyone they thought would enjoy watching me get destroyed, but they forgot to consider who might have a problem with their little performance. Irene has been planning her own confrontation with Tom for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Tomorrow's lunch is going to give her the perfect audience for her own show. They want a show? They're going to get one they'll never forget. Tom just left his house. Time to go have a conversation with his wife about what her husband has really been doing on Tuesday nights. Update coming tomorrow after the lunch. Update 1. Holy crap, you guys. The response to my first post was insane. For everyone asking if this is real, trust me, I wish it wasn't. For those telling me to just leave, I get it, but you don't understand what these people put me through for 4 years? They want to destroy me publicly? Fine. But they're going to find out what happens when you underestimate someone for that long. So Friday night, I went to talk to Irene like I planned. Tom had left for his usual bar night with work buddies, which gave us about 3 hours before he'd be back. I knocked on their door around 8:30 and told Irene I needed to talk to her about something important. She invited me in and made coffee, probably thinking this was about our usual conversations regarding Tom's suspicious behavior. I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of Tom and Vanessa in my living room last month. Watching Irene's face change as she listened was brutal. She went from confused to angry to completely devastated in the span of about 2 minutes. When Tom's voice came through clearly saying he'd never really respected me anyway and that sleeping with my wife was probably doing me a favor, Irene actually stood up and started pacing around their kitchen. She asked me to play it again. Then she asked me to send her a copy. Then she started asking questions about everything I'd observed over the past few months. How long did I think it had been going on? Did I have any other evidence? Had I confronted either of them yet? I showed her the screenshots from Vanessa's family chat about tomorrow's lunch, reading about how they planned to have Tom walk in for a dramatic kiss while everyone watched me get humiliated made Irene angrier than I'd ever seen her. She kept saying she couldn't believe Tom would participate in something so cruel, but then she'd remember the recording and realize he absolutely would. The conversation went on for almost 2 hours. Irene told me things about Tom that I'd never known, even after being friends with him for over a decade. Apparently, he'd cheated on his previous girlfriend before Irene, but she'd only found out about that recently when the ex contacted her on social media. The ex had reached out because she'd seen Tom and Irene's engagement announcement and felt guilty about not saying something sooner. She told Irene about how Tom had been sleeping with multiple women during their relationship and had convinced her that she was being paranoid when she questioned his behavior. Tom had a pattern of getting bored in relationships and seeking excitement elsewhere, but he was smart about covering his tracks. He would create elaborate lies about work commitments and friend obligations to cover his absences. He was particularly good at making his partners feel like they were being unreasonable for questioning him. According to his ex, Tom had actually laughed about how easy it was to manipulate women who trusted him. Hearing all of this made me realize that Tom's friendship with me had probably been just as calculated as his relationship with Irene. I'd always thought he genuinely cared about our friendship, but now I could see how he'd been using me as an alibi for years. Every Tuesday when he told Irene he was at poker with me, he was building a pattern of trustworthy behavior that would make it easier to lie about other things later. What really got to Irene was learning that Tom had been lying about our poker nights. She'd always trusted those Tuesday evenings because she thought he was with me and our other friends. Finding out that he'd been using our friendship as cover for his affair with my wife made her feel like she'd been played twice over. She kept saying she felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. But here's where things got interesting. Irene didn't just want to confront Tom privately. She wanted to make him face consequences for his actions in front of other people, just like he was planning to do to me. She asked me detailed questions about tomorrow's lunch, who would be there, what the family had planned, and when Tom was supposed to make his dramatic entrance. We spent the rest of the evening coordinating our own plan. Irene was going to show up at the lunch right after Tom's big moment with Vanessa, but before they could throw the divorce papers at me, she wanted to walk in just as everyone was celebrating their successful humiliation of me and remind them that Tom had his own wife and his own marriage that he'd been destroying. Saturday morning, I woke up to 17 text messages from Vanessa. She was excited about the lunch, asking if I'd picked out my nice shirt yet, wondering if I was looking forward to seeing everyone. The level of fake enthusiasm in her messages was honestly impressive. She was practically bouncing off the walls with anticipation for an event where she planned to destroy my life in front of an audience. I responded with the same energy, telling her I couldn't wait to see what the day would bring and that I was sure it would be memorable for everyone involved. She sent back heart emojis and said she loved me and was so glad we'd have this special time with her family. Around noon, Vanessa left to help her mom prepare for the lunch. She kissed me goodbye and reminded me to be at her parents' house by 2 o'clock sharp. She said timing was really important today and that I shouldn't be late because they had some special things planned. She was practically glowing with excitement as she walked out our front door. That gave me the entire afternoon to finalize preparations with Irene. We met at a coffee shop near her house to go over everything one more time. She'd spent the morning gathering her own evidence of Tom's lies and deception, bank statements showing charges at restaurants and hotels she'd never been to, screenshots of text conversations where Tom had lied about his whereabouts, a list of all the Tuesday nights over the past year when he'd claimed to be at poker but had clearly been somewhere else. Irene also brought something I hadn't expected. She'd called Tom's work that morning pretending to need to reach him for an emergency and found out that he'd been taking vacation days on several of the Tuesdays when he'd told her he was working late before poker. The pattern of deception went back months longer than either of us had realized. The receptionist had been helpful, mentioning that Tom had been taking a lot of personal time lately and seemed to be using his vacation days strategically throughout the week rather than taking longer breaks. This revelation hit me hard because it meant Tom had been planning his deception far more carefully than either of us had realized. He wasn't just lying spontaneously or taking advantage of convenient opportunities. He was systematically creating time and alibis for his affair with my wife. The level of premeditation made everything feel more personal and more cruel. Irene had also done some investigating on her own that weekend. She'd gone through their shared calendar and cross-referenced Tom's claimed work events with his actual schedule. She found discrepancies going back almost 6 months. Company dinners that never happened, training sessions that didn't exist, business trips that his coworkers knew nothing about. Tom had been building an entire false reality to hide his relationship with Vanessa. But what really surprised me was how strategic Irene had become overnight. She'd thought through exactly how she wanted to handle tomorrow's confrontation. She didn't just want to burst in and make a scene. She wanted to time her entrance perfectly to maximize the impact on Tom and minimize the embarrassment for both of us. Her plan was brilliant and showed she'd been thinking about this for hours. She would wait outside Clarence and Gladys's house until she saw Tom arrive for his dramatic entrance. She'd give him about 5 minutes to make his big speech about being twice the man I am and to kiss my wife in front of everyone. Then she'd walk in during the moment when they thought they'd successfully destroyed me and remind everyone that Tom had been lying to her for months about where he spent his Tuesday evenings. Irene had thought through every detail of her entrance. She would walk in calmly and address Tom directly, asking him to explain to everyone where he'd really been on all those Tuesday nights when he claimed to be playing poker with me. She would ask Vanessa to clarify whether she'd been with Tom during those times when he was supposedly at my house. She wanted to force both of them to either admit their deception in front of the audience or lie publicly while she had evidence to contradict them. She'd even planned what to say to Vanessa's family. She wanted to thank them for gathering everyone together because it would save her the trouble of calling everyone individually to let them know about Tom's pattern of deception. She figured if they wanted to make private matters public, she might as well take advantage of the audience they'd assembled. We also talked about what would happen after the confrontation. Irene had already started looking into divorce attorneys and had moved some of her personal belongings to her sister's house. She wasn't planning to give Tom a chance to talk his way out of this or convince her to work things out. She was done with the relationship and wanted to make sure he understood that publicly. I told her about my own preparations over the past 3 years. The savings account Tom and Vanessa didn't know about, the business connections I'd built in their social circle, the documentation I'd been keeping of how Vanessa's family treated me. Irene was impressed by how thoroughly I'd prepared for this moment, but she also seemed sad that I'd felt the need to protect myself for so long. She asked me why I'd stayed in the marriage if I'd known for 3 years that Vanessa and her family were actively working against me. That was a harder question to answer than I'd expected. Part of it was that I wanted to prove them wrong about who I was. Part of it was that I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of driving me away. But mostly, I think I wanted to be in a position of strength when the truth finally came out. I explained to Irene that leaving immediately after discovering the family chat would have felt like admitting defeat. They would have told everyone that I couldn't handle being part of a successful family and that I'd run away when faced with honest feedback about my shortcomings. Staying and improving myself meant that when the confrontation finally happened, I could face them as an equal, rather than as the failure they thought I was. There was also a practical element to my decision. I needed time to build up resources and connections that would protect me after the marriage ended. If I'd left 3 years ago, I would have been starting over with nothing but a basic construction job and no savings. By staying and building my business, I'd created a foundation that would let me rebuild my life successfully rather than just survive the divorce. Irene appreciated the strategic thinking behind my approach. She said she'd been doing something similar in her own marriage, staying long enough to gather evidence and prepare herself financially and emotionally for the confrontation. She'd been documenting Tom's behavior and building her own support network so that when she finally left, she'd be in control of the narrative rather than letting him paint her as unstable or unreasonable. Irene understood that completely. She said she'd been staying in her marriage with Tom for similar reasons, waiting for the right moment to confront his behavior instead of just leaving quietly. She wanted him to face real consequences for his actions, not just get away with cheating and move on to the next relationship. By the time we finished talking, we both felt ready for tomorrow. Irene would be waiting outside at 1:45. I would go in at 2 o'clock as planned and let Vanessa's family start their show. Tom would arrive for his big moment around 2:30 based on what I'd read in their chat messages, and then Irene would make her entrance and turn their planned humiliation of me into a very different kind of confrontation. Saturday evening, Vanessa came home from her parents' house more excited than I'd seen her in months. She kept talking about how wonderful tomorrow was going to be and how much her family was looking forward to spending time with me. She mentioned that Tom would be stopping by during lunch and that she thought I'd really enjoy seeing him. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. She spent the evening going over details that she thought were just casual conversation, but were actually her final preparations for tomorrow's ambush. She asked me what time I planned to leave the house and reminded me that her dad got cranky when people were late. She mentioned that her mom had made my favorite dessert and that Maria had even offered to drive me home afterward if I needed a ride. She talked about how nice it would be to have everyone together and how these family moments were so important. The level of manipulation in her casual comments was staggering. She was trying to make sure I felt comfortable and unsuspecting while simultaneously ensuring that all the logistics were in place for maximum impact. She wanted me to arrive relaxed and happy so that the contrast with their plan to destruction would be more dramatic. I played along perfectly, telling her I was looking forward to whatever surprises the day might bring. She laughed and said there would definitely be surprises and that she hoped I was ready for some big changes in our lives. She kept making these cryptic comments about new beginnings and fresh starts, clearly unable to contain her excitement about tomorrow's plan. She even mentioned that she thought some of the changes would be really good for both of us in the long run. That night, as Vanessa was getting ready for bed, she started talking about our future together. She said she'd been thinking a lot about what she really wanted in life and whether she was truly happy with the choices she'd made. She asked me if I ever wondered about different paths my life could have taken and whether I had any regrets about the decisions I'd made. The conversation was surreal. Here was my wife less than 24 hours before she planned to publicly humiliate and divorce me, asking me about my life satisfaction and future goals. She was fishing for some kind of emotional confession or breakdown that would make tomorrow's destruction even more dramatic. I told her I was exactly where I wanted to be and that I'd never been more confident about the direction my life was heading. I said I felt like everything over the past few years had been building towards something important and that I was ready for whatever came next. She seemed pleased with that response and said she was glad I felt prepared for change. This morning, I woke up to more text messages from Vanessa, who was already at her parents' house helping with final preparations. She reminded me again about the 2 o'clock timing and said her whole family was excited to see me. She sent a photo of the dining room table set for about 15 people and said it was going to be a very special gathering. Right now, it's 1:15, and I'm getting dressed in my nice shirt like she requested. In 45 minutes, I'm going to walk into that dining room and let them start their show. Tom will arrive, thinking he's walking into his moment of triumph. Vanessa will deliver her practice speech about how he's twice the man I am. And then Irene is going to walk through that front door and change everything. We'll update after the lunch. This is either going to be the best revenge ever or the most spectacular failure. Either way, you'll get the full story. Update 2. Okay, I need to get this all down while it's still fresh because what just happened was absolutely unreal. For everyone who said this couldn't be real, trust me, I wish you were right. For everyone who wanted the full details of the confrontation, buckle up, because this got messier than any of us expected. I arrived at Clarence and Gladys's house at exactly 2 o'clock like Vanessa had requested. The dining room was set up like some kind of formal event, with about 15 chairs around their extended table. I recognized most of the people already there, my co-workers from the construction site, a few neighbors from our street, some people from the gym, and Maria's boyfriend, who I'd never really talked to before. Everyone was making small talk and seemed relaxed, like they thought they were just there for a normal family lunch. Vanessa greeted me at the door with this huge smile and a kiss on the cheek, telling me how handsome I looked in my nice shirt. She was practically glowing with excitement and kept making comments about how special today was going to be. She led me around the room, introducing me to people as her loving husband and talking about how much our relationship meant to her family. The level of performance was honestly impressive. Clarence was being more friendly than he'd been in years, shaking my hand and asking about work projects. Gladys kept complimenting my appearance and telling me how glad she was that I could make it. Patrick was actually making conversation with me instead of his usual silent treatment. Maria was taking photos of everyone and talking about how wonderful it was to have the whole family together. They were all playing their parts perfectly while knowing exactly what they had planned for me. The first 30 minutes felt like a normal family gathering, which I now realize was completely intentional. They wanted everyone to see us as a happy family before they destroyed that image publicly. They wanted the contrast to be as dramatic as possible. Vanessa kept checking her phone and glancing toward the front door, clearly waiting for Tom's arrival to trigger the next phase of their plan. Around 2:30, right on schedule, there was a knock at the front door. Vanessa practically jumped up to answer it, and I could hear her talking to Tom in the entryway. She was telling him how excited she was to see him and how perfect the timing was. Then she led him into the dining room where everyone was gathered. Tom walked in looking confident and relaxed, like he was exactly where he belonged. He greeted everyone warmly and made his way around the room shaking hands and chatting with people. When he got to me, he gave me this big friendly hug and told me how great it was to see me, asking how I'd been and saying we needed to get together for poker soon. The man was playing his role flawlessly while knowing he was about to sleep with my wife in front of everyone. Clarence suggested we all sit down for lunch, and there was this moment where everyone was finding their seats and getting settled. I could feel the energy in the room shifting as Vanessa and her family exchanged looks. This was clearly the moment they'd been building toward. Gladys stood up and said she wanted to make a toast before we ate, and everyone grabbed their glasses. That's when Vanessa stood up and said she had something important to share with everyone. She thanked everyone for coming and said she'd gathered them here because she had some big news about her life and her future. She talked about how important it was to have the people you care about around you when you make major life decisions. She was building up to her big moment with this practice speech about authenticity and following your heart. Then she launched into her prepared remarks about how she'd been doing a lot of thinking about what she really wanted in life and whether she was truly happy with the choices she'd made. She said she'd realized that sometimes you have to be honest about when a relationship isn't working, even if it's difficult for everyone involved. She looked directly at me and said she hoped I would understand that she needed to make some changes for both of our sakes. She talked about how she'd found someone who understood her better and supported her dreams in ways that I never had. She said this person made her feel like the woman she was meant to be and showed her what real partnership looked like. She was building toward revealing Tom as her affair partner and painting their relationship as some kind of romantic awakening. Tom was nodding along supportively and reaching for Vanessa's hand like they'd rehearsed this moment. Clarence and Gladys were watching with these satisfied expressions, clearly proud of how well their daughter was delivering her speech. Patrick had his phone out recording everything, and Maria was positioning herself to get better angles of what was about to happen. Vanessa was just getting to the part where she was going to reveal Tom as her new partner when there was another knock at the front door. Everyone looked confused because they weren't expecting anyone else. Clarence got up to answer it, but before he could make it to the entryway, the front door opened and Irene walked in. The change in the room was immediate. Tom went completely pale and actually stepped back from Vanessa like he'd been burned. Vanessa looked confused and asked who this woman was and why she was interrupting their family gathering. Clarence demanded to know what was going on and how this person had gotten into his house. Irene walked calmly into the dining room and introduced herself to everyone as Tom's wife. She said she'd come to join the lunch because she'd heard there was going to be some important news shared, and she thought she might have some information that would interest everyone. She looked directly at Tom and asked him if he wanted to explain to everyone why he hadn't mentioned to her that he was attending a family lunch today. Tom started stammering about how this was a misunderstanding and asking Irene what she was doing there. He said she was obviously confused about something and should probably go home so they could talk privately later. He was trying to maintain his composure, but you could see the panic in his eyes as he realized his carefully planned moment was falling apart. Irene asked Tom to explain to everyone where he'd been on Tuesday evenings for the past year when he told her he was playing poker with. She said she'd become curious about his poker nights and had done some investigating into his actual whereabouts during those times. She asked if he wanted to tell everyone himself or if she should share what she'd discovered. Vanessa was still trying to salvage her planned speech and asked why this woman was disrupting their family celebration with questions about poker games. She said this was supposed to be a special moment for her and Tom and asked Irene to please leave so they could continue their announcement. She was clearly frustrated that her big dramatic moment was being hijacked by someone she didn't know. That's when Irene pulled out her phone and asked if anyone would like to hear a recording of Tom and Vanessa discussing their relationship and their plans for today's lunch. The room went completely silent as she started playing the audio I'd recorded in my living room last month. Tom's voice came through clearly, talking about how he'd never really respected me and how sleeping with my wife was probably doing me a favor. Everyone in the room was staring at Tom and Vanessa as they listened to them discuss their affair and their plans to humiliate me in front of this exact group of people. You could hear Vanessa talking about how her family's plan would make everything easier, and Tom saying he was looking forward to seeing me get what I deserved. The recording was devastating because it showed how calculated and cruel their planning had been. Clarence started demanding explanations from both Tom and Vanessa about what they were hearing. Gladys was asking why there was a recording of their private conversations and how this woman had gotten access to it. Patrick was still recording everything, but now seemed confused about what story he was supposed to be capturing. Maria was asking who had made this recording and why they were all hearing about it now. Tom was trying to explain that the recording was taken out of context and didn't represent what had actually been happening between him and Vanessa. He said someone had obviously been spying on them and manipulating the situation to make them look bad. He was insisting that his friendship with me was genuine and that he would never intentionally hurt me or betray our relationship. Vanessa was trying a different approach, saying that the recording proved she'd been honest about wanting to end our marriage and that everyone should respect her decision to pursue happiness with someone else. She said the timing might seem abrupt, but that she'd been thinking about this for months and had the right to make choices about her own life. She was attempting to reframe their betrayal as her being brave enough to follow her heart. But Irene wasn't finished. She started asking Tom specific questions about the vacation days he'd taken from work on Tuesdays when he claimed to be working late before poker. She asked him to explain the charges on their credit card for restaurants and hotels that she'd never been to. She wanted him to account for all the lies he'd told her while he was conducting his affair with my wife. Tom was getting more defensive and started saying that Irene was invading his privacy and making accusations without understanding the full situation. He said she was embarrassing herself by making a scene in front of people who didn't need to be involved in their personal problems. He was trying to turn the situation around and make Irene look like the unreasonable one for confronting him publicly. That's when I finally spoke up. I told everyone that I'd known about the affair for weeks and that I'd been documenting their planning for today's humiliation. I said I'd invited Irene because I thought she deserved to know what her husband had been doing, and that she'd earned the right to confront him in front of the same audience they'd planned to use against me. The room erupted. Clarence was demanding to know why I hadn't said anything sooner if I knew about the affair. Gladys was asking why I'd let them plan this lunch if I knew what was going to happen. Patrick was confused about whether he should still be recording. Maria was asking why I'd brought Tom's wife into their family business. My coworkers were asking if they should leave. The neighbors were whispering to each other about what they'd walked into. Vanessa was furious that I'd known about her plans and had undermined her moment. She said I'd ruined everything by involving outside people in our marriage problems, and that I had no right to record private conversations or share them with strangers. She was accusing me of being manipulative and vindictive for planning this counterattack instead of just accepting her decision to leave me. Tom was trying to salvage his relationship with Irene by saying that his affair with Vanessa had been a mistake and that he'd been planning to end it before anyone got hurt. He was claiming that he'd never intended for things to go as far as they had, and that he'd been looking for a way to tell Irene the truth without destroying their marriage. He was begging her to let him explain everything privately so they could work through their problems. But Irene wasn't buying any of it. She told Tom that she'd already contacted a divorce attorney and that she'd moved her belongings out of their house that morning. She said she wasn't interested in explanations or apologies because the recording had shown her exactly how he really felt about both her and me. She told him he could explain himself to the divorce lawyer. The lunch that was supposed to be my public humiliation had turned into complete chaos. Vanessa's family was arguing among themselves about how their plan had gone wrong. Tom was trying to convince multiple people that he wasn't the person they thought he was. Irene was calmly explaining to anyone who would listen that she'd been investigating Tom's behavior for months, and I was watching it all unfold exactly the way I'd hoped it would. But here's the thing. This wasn't even the end of what I had planned, because while everyone was focused on the drama with Tom and Irene, they hadn't noticed that I'd been recording this entire confrontation on my phone. And they definitely hadn't realized that some of the people in that room weren't just random guests. Part 4 coming soon. The real revenge hasn't even started yet, and trust me, it gets so much worse. Final update. Everyone asking what I meant about the real revenge not starting yet, and who the mysterious guests were. Well, buckle up, because this is where 3 years of planning finally paid off, in ways that Vanessa and her family never saw coming. So when I left off, the lunch had turned into complete chaos with Tom and Vanessa trying to defend themselves while Irene was systematically destroying Tom's credibility. But here's what I didn't mention in my last update. I'd been recording everything on my phone from the moment I walked into that house. Every word of Vanessa's practice speech, every lie Tom told, every smug comment from her family before their plan fell apart. But more importantly, some of the people in that room weren't random guests like everyone thought. Remember how I mentioned building business connections in their social circle over the past 3 years? Well, Stephen and his wife weren't just there because they knew Clarence from golf. Stephen owns the largest construction company in our area and had been considering hiring me for a major contract. Landon from our gym wasn't just there as a neighbor. He works in marketing at the company where Vanessa has been trying to get promoted for 2 years. While everyone was focused on the drama with Tom and Irene, I was watching these key people react to everything they were hearing. Stephen was looking disgusted as he listened to Tom talk about how he'd never respected me and how sleeping with my wife was doing me a favor. Landon was taking notes on his phone as Vanessa talked about how I was holding her back and how she deserved better than someone in construction. That's when I decided it was time to share some additional context with everyone. I stood up and asked if anyone wanted to hear what Vanessa and her family really thought about the people in this room. I explained that I'd been documenting their private conversations for months and had some interesting insights into their opinions about blue-collar workers and people they considered beneath them. I played a recording from their family chat where Clarence talked about how embarrassing it was to have a construction worker in the family, and how he told his golf buddies that I was just temporary until Vanessa came to her senses. You could see Stephen's expression change as he realized these people had been mocking his entire profession behind closed doors. Then I played Gladys talking about how she couldn't understand why successful men like Landon would waste time at the same gym as someone like me, and how she hoped Vanessa would start making friends with a better class of people. Landon looked genuinely offended as he heard someone he'd considered a friend dismissing him based on his willingness to be friendly with. Vanessa was frantically trying to stop me from playing more recordings, saying I was violating her family's privacy and taking their words out of context. She insisted that their conversations were private family discussions and that everyone was misunderstanding what they meant. She was trying to convince people that their comments weren't really about class or profession, but about specific concerns they had about our relationship compatibility. But I wasn't finished. I played the recording where Maria talked about how pathetic it was that I thought I belonged in their social circle and how they needed to help Vanessa understand that she was slumming it by staying married to me. I played Patrick discussing how they could use today's lunch to not only humiliate me, but also to send a message to other people in their circle about maintaining proper standards. The room was getting more uncomfortable by the minute, as people heard exactly what this family thought about them and people like them. My coworkers were hearing themselves described as unsuitable company for Vanessa. The neighbors were learning that they'd been invited specifically to witness what the family considered a cautionary tale about marrying beneath your station. Clarence tried to regain control by saying that their family conversations were being misrepresented and that everyone was missing the point of what was supposed to be a celebration of Vanessa's new relationship. He said they'd never meant any disrespect to the hardworking people in the room and that their concerns about me were personal, not professional. He was trying to save face while the foundation of his social relationships crumbled around him. That's when Stephen spoke up and asked Clarence directly whether he'd actually said that construction work was embarrassing and that he was ashamed to be associated with it through his daughter's marriage. Stephen wanted to know if Clarence had really told his golf buddies that successful contractors like himself were just as bad as the workers they employed because they all belonged to the same inferior class. Clarence was caught completely off guard by the direct confrontation from someone he respected and had been trying to impress for years. He started stammering about how those conversations had been taken out of context and that he'd never meant to imply that construction work wasn't valuable. He was trying to backtrack while everyone in the room could see that he was just scrambling to protect his reputation. Gladys jumped in to try to help her husband by explaining that their family had nothing against hardworking people and that their concerns about me were based on specific behaviors, not my profession. She said they'd always appreciated the services that contractors and other blue-collar workers provided, and that they'd never intended to suggest otherwise. She was trying to reframe their classist comments as legitimate personal concerns about their daughter's marriage. But Landon wasn't buying it either. He asked Gladys to explain what she'd meant when she said she hoped Vanessa would start making friends with a better class of people and why she'd specifically mentioned him as someone who was wasting his time being friendly with me. He wanted to know what exactly made him and others like him the wrong class of people for Vanessa to associate with. The family was clearly struggling to defend statements that sounded even worse when they had to explain them to the actual people they'd been disparaging. They'd been so confident in their superiority and so comfortable in their private prejudices that they'd never prepared for having to justify their attitudes to the people they looked down on. That's when I revealed the final part of my plan. I told everyone that I'd been building my own business over the past 3 years, and that I'd been documenting not just their private conversations, but also their attempts to sabotage my professional relationships. I explained that Clarence had been actively trying to undermine my reputation with potential clients, and that Gladys had been spreading rumors about my work quality to people in their social circle. I had recordings of Clarence telling Stephen that I was unreliable and did shoddy work, even though Stephen had been consistently satisfied with the jobs I'd done for him. I had evidence of Gladys telling other women at their country club that I'd overcharged them for services and that people should be careful about hiring me. I'd been documenting their systematic campaign to destroy my business reputation while pretending to be supportive family members. Stephen was furious when he heard the recording of Clarence badmouthing my work quality to him. He'd been considering me for a major contract worth more than I'd made in the past 2 years, and he realized that Clarence had been deliberately trying to sabotage that opportunity. He asked Clarence directly why he'd been lying about my work when he knew Stephen had been happy with everything I'd done. Landon was equally angry when he heard about the rumors Gladys had been spreading. He'd recommended my services to several people at our gym, and now he realized that some of them might have been influenced by false information. He wanted to know why Gladys had been actively working against her own son-in-law's business while pretending to support our marriage. The confrontation was getting more intense as people realized the scope of the family's deception. They hadn't just been privately critical of me. They'd been actively working to destroy my professional reputation while maintaining the facade of being supportive in-laws. The level of calculated cruelty was becoming clear to everyone in the room. Vanessa was trying to defend her family by saying that their concerns about my business practices were legitimate and that they'd been trying to protect people from potential problems. She insisted that they'd never intended to harm my business and that any criticism they'd shared had been based on genuine worries about quality and reliability. She was attempting to reframe their sabotage as concerned family members looking out for the community. But I'd prepared for that defense too. I played recordings of them laughing about how easy it was to plant doubts about my work, and how satisfying it was to watch me struggle to build my business while they undermined me behind the scenes. You could hear them discussing which potential clients to target and how to phrase their concerns to sound reasonable while being maximally damaging. Tom was trying to use the focus on the family's behavior to deflect attention from his own actions. But Irene wasn't letting him off the hook. She was methodically going through the timeline of his lies and asking him to explain each deception in front of everyone. She wanted him to account for every lie he'd told her and every betrayal he'd committed while pretending to be a faithful husband and loyal friend. The room was in complete chaos with multiple confrontations happening simultaneously. Clarence and Gladys were trying to defend their sabotage of my business to people who'd been affected by their lies. Tom was failing to explain his affair to a wife who had evidence of every deception. Vanessa was attempting to maintain that their family's actions were justified while the evidence clearly showed their malicious intent. But here's the beautiful part. While this was all happening, I was getting text messages from other people who'd heard about the lunch through social media. Remember how Maria had planned to livestream my humiliation? Well, Patrick had been recording everything, and some of it was already being shared online. But instead of showing my destruction, it was documenting their complete exposure. People who knew this family were seeing their true attitudes toward working-class people. Potential clients were learning about their campaign to sabotage my business. Their social circle was discovering how they really felt about people they considered beneath them. The public humiliation they'd planned for me was happening to them instead. By the time the lunch finally ended, the damage was done. Stephen told me that the major contract was mine, and that he'd be recommending me to other developers who needed quality work. Landon said he'd be correcting any false information that had been spread about my business, and that he'd make sure people knew the real story. My coworkers were talking about how they'd never seen such shameless, elitist behavior from people who pretended to be decent. Vanessa's family had wanted to destroy my reputation and drive me out of town in shame. Instead, they'd expose themselves as the kind of people who would sabotage their own family members' livelihood while pretending to care about them. They'd revealed their true feelings about the working-class people in their community and lost the respect of everyone who mattered. The lunch that was supposed to end with me begging for forgiveness while Tom and Vanessa celebrated their new relationship ended with both of them facing the consequences of their deception, while I walked away with new business opportunities and the respect of people who'd seen what I was really dealing with. 3 years of planning had paid off perfectly. They'd underestimated me for the last time.